The clatter of the taxi's wheels on the old green flagstones of the Hutong alleyway was a familiar melody, the sound of homecoming. 3 weeks in Suzhou, attending a symposium on Longjing tea culture, had been enlightening, but nothing compared to the feeling of returning to Jingyuetang. It was more than a tea house. It was my soul, a place where every fiber of the dark, aged wood still held the gentle fragrance of Ming Yu, my late wife, who had walked with me through half a lifetime of storms. Here, the pure scent of sandalwood incense, the rustic smell of Xuan paper, and the soft gurgle of water in the Xisha teapot created a world of their own, a sanctuary for the spirit against the clamor of modern Beijing. I had longed to sit at my old tea table, brew a pot of Tiguanyin, and let the profound silence heal the weariness of a long journey. But as the familiar crimson-lacquered gate, guarded by 2 moss-covered stone lions, came into view at the end of the alley, a cold sense of foreboding crept into my chest. The gate was ajar, something that never happened. And from the opening it was not the silence I yearned for that spilled out, but a chaotic, jarring cacophony of modern electronic music, the kind one would hear in the bars of Sanlitun. My heart skipped a beat. I pushed the gate open with all my strength, and in that moment, the world I had spent a lifetime building collapsed before my very eyes. The inner courtyard, with its ancient mossy rockery where water trickled year-round, and where the 100-year-old camellia tree that Ming Yue cherished most was quietly blooming, had been transformed into a chaotic film set. High-powered floodlights were aimed at the main hall, their blinding glare erasing all subtlety. A tangled web of electrical cords snaked around the priceless Nanmu pillars. The cloying scent of cheap perfume and spilled wine overwhelmed the pure fragrance of the damp earth after the morning's light rain. In the center of the courtyard stood my only son, Li Chang. He was dressed in a sleek designer suit, his hair slicked back with an excessive amount of gel. His face was aglow with a manufactured radiance as he chattered animatedly into a smartphone mounted on a tripod. Beside him stood Anna, his internet celebrity girlfriend. She was poured into a tight-fitting dress, her face a mask of heavy makeup that concealed any natural expression. She was constantly striking poses and giggling at another phone. Dozens of strangers, fashionably dressed young people, milled about in a state of disarray. They held wine glasses instead of teacups, their laughter loud and grating. And worse, they placed their expensive designer handbags on the Zeton wood tea table, an antique I had spent a decade searching for, finally acquiring it from a collector in Fujian. I stood frozen in the gateway, the small suitcase slipping from my numb fingers and landing on the stone floor without making a sound loud enough to be noticed amidst the din. It felt like a shard of ice had been driven through my heart, not a sharp, violent pain, but a creeping, numbing cold that froze every cell, every thought. Was this Jingyue Tang? Or was it a nightmare from which I couldn't awaken? Li Chang finally saw me. The smile on his lips faltered for a fraction of a second, but he regained his composure almost instantly. He gestured to Anna, then strode towards me with the casual gait of a man who considers himself the master of all he surveys. "Father, you're back? Was the trip all right?" His voice held not a hint of remorse, not a trace of shame, only the self-satisfaction of one who has arranged everything and is now awaiting applause. I didn't answer. My eyes swept over the chaos behind him, settling on the main hall. The calligraphy scroll, a heart as serene as water, which I had personally written on the first anniversary of Ming Yue's death, hung in its place of honor on the main wall. Now, it was half obscured by a garish pink neon backdrop with the ridiculous English words, "Anna's Tea Club. Reborn. Reborn." They called this desecration, this sacrilege, a rebirth. "What is this?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice from trembling, but the sound that came out was hoarse and foreign, as if from a stranger. Anna sauntered over, linking her arm with Li Chang's. Her smile was like a porcelain mask, perfect but lifeless. "Hello, Uncle. We're doing a live stream to promote our new project. What do you think? Energetic, trendy, isn't it? Time to breathe some new life into these old things." I ignored her, looking straight into Li Chang's eyes. His eyes, once so clear and full of admiration when he was a child, when he would sit on my lap and listen to me tell the history of each teapot, were now filled only with cold calculation and a frightening distance. "What project?" He took a deep breath, as if preparing for a well-rehearsed and important speech. "Father, it's time for Jingyue Tang to change. This place is too old, too quiet. It's dying in the past. Anna and I have decided to transform it into a high-end tea club, a fusion of tradition and modernity, a place for the wealthy youth to check in, to experience culture in their own way." "Their own way?" I repeated, the words like shards of broken glass in my throat. "By turning a temple of tranquility into a noisy bar? By placing leather bags on 1,000-year-old Zeton wood?" He shrugged, a single gesture that dismissed my entire life, that dismissed the legacy of our ancestors. That's business, father. It's about keeping up with the times. You can't just hoard a museum for your own memories forever. This is an asset, and assets need to generate profit. Mother in heaven would surely be proud to see the family estate flourishing like this. He dared to mention Mingyue. He dared to use her name to justify this blasphemy. The rage I had been suppressing began to surge, but the cold reason of a man who had spent a lifetime cultivating stillness held it in check. And then, he said the words that sealed his fate in my mind, the words that transformed my pain into an iron resolve. From now on, this place is a business. I'm the CEO. You can stay as a heritage consultant. After all, your old stories could be an interesting highlight to tell our VIP clients. He looked at me, waiting for approval, or perhaps for the feeble protest of an old man past his prime. But he saw nothing. He did not see the storm raging behind my calm facade. He did not see the image of Mingyue dissolving in the smoke of this insult. He saw only an old man, standing silently, seemingly resigned. I smiled. A slow, empty smile that did not reach my eyes. The kind of smile people often mistake for surrender. In my mind, a blueprint began to form, not of concrete and steel, but of patience and wisdom. A game of Go, where my opponent did not even know he had become a piece on the board. They would never forget this day. That was not a vow made in the heat of anger. It was the first, precise, and decisive brushstroke of a perfect masterpiece of calligraphy. I turned my back on the chaos, on my son's smug smile and his girlfriend's pitying gaze. Not another word. Any words now would be meaningless. I walked directly to the west wing, to my bedroom, the only place that seemed untouched by the hands of this rebirth. The music and laughter still beat against my back like sharp needles, but they already belonged to another world, a world to which I no longer belonged, nor wished to. I closed the heavy Nanmu wood door, and a relative silence descended, like plunging into the depths of a deep lake, the world above becoming nothing more than hazy ripples. The room was unchanged. The simple wooden bed that Mingyu and I had shared for 30 years. The writing desk where I often ground ink and practiced calligraphy. And on the opposite wall, the only portrait of Mingyue, a charcoal sketch by an old artist friend. In it, she was smiling gently, holding a small teacup, her eyes seeming to look at me, as if asking what I would do. She had spent her life with me building Jingyue Tang, not with bricks and mortar, but with love, with meticulous attention to every detail, with a profound respect for art and tranquility. Now, all of it was being trampled underfoot. I sat down on the wooden stool, my hands on my knees, my back straight. I tried to regulate my breathing. I did not feel anger in the usual sense. Anger is a wildfire. It consumes everything, including the one who starts it, leaving behind only ashes and regret. My emotion now was colder, sharper, like a block of ice meticulously carved into a blade. I had spent my life learning to control my mind through the art of tea, to find stillness in a cup, to find focus in a brushstroke. Now, that skill had become my only weapon. I did not sleep that night. After the boisterous crowd had departed, leaving behind a battlefield of cigarette butts, empty wine glasses, and the garish remnants of cheap decorations, I could hear Li Cheng and Anna in the main hall. Their voices filtered through the cracks in the door. They were discussing contracts, inviting other celebrities for promotion, replacing my antique furniture with imported leather sofas. It has to be completely modernized, Chiang, Anna's shrill voice declared. These antiques are only good for photos. They're not comfortable to sit on at all. Every word they spoke was another hammer blow, driving my resolve deeper. Around 2 in the morning, when the entire tea house had finally sunk into absolute silence, I rose. I went to the writing desk and lit a small oil lamp instead of turning on the electric light. The warm golden glow spread, dispelling some of the coldness that had enveloped the place. I unrolled a large sheet of swan paper, the finest quality that I reserved only for my most cherished works. I did not immediately grind the ink. Instead, I took out a stick of Songyan ink, a gift from an old friend in Anhui. I carefully added drops of cold water from an earthenware kettle into the Duangxi inkstone, then began to grind the ink in the silence. The movement of my wrist was steady, slow, without a hint of haste. The faint, fragrant scent of the ink began to fill the air, the scent of concentration, of a new beginning, the scent of a plan taking shape. I did not practice calligraphy. I took out an old leather-bound notebook, its cover frayed with time. This was my work journal from 30 years ago, recording every detail of when I renovated Jingyu Tang after inheriting it from my father. I turned the yellowed pages, diagrams of the wooden beam system, notes on the type of yin-yang tiles used, custom-made from an ancient kiln, the origin of the cobblestones in the courtyard, which Mingyu and I had hand-picked from a stream in the western hills. Li Qiang thought he held an asset. He was tragically mistaken. He was standing on a historical treasure, a legacy woven through generations, But his vision, obscured by numbers and glitter, was too short to see it, and that was his fatal weakness. I began to write, not words of lamentation or an emotional plan for revenge. I wrote down facts, details, names. Under the flickering lamplight, the blank page was gradually filled with neat, clear characters. I was drafting a plan, a blueprint as detailed as if I were preparing to build a new structure. Phase 1. Gather and consolidate. Document every act of destruction. Take photographs. Back up all documents related to the tea house's history. Phase 2. Sow the seeds of doubt. Seek assistance. Release vague but substantiated information, letting the experts find their own way here. Phase 3. Construct the legend. Turn doubt into a powerful narrative, a story authenticated by history, irrefutable. Phase 4. The ripening. Choose the right moment, when the opponent is at his most confident, his most arrogant, to reveal the entire hand. I looked at Mingyue's portrait on the wall. She would not have wanted a direct confrontation, no arguments or violence. She always used to say that soft water can wear away hard rock, not through force, but through persistence and perseverance. My plan would be that water. Li Chang and Anna were standing on a rock they thought was solid. They would never know about the undercurrent slowly eroding the foundation right beneath their feet, until everything collapsed without a single warning. I placed the brush on the jade brush rest. Outside, the first rays of dawn began to pierce the window. A new day was beginning. For my son, it was a day of business opportunities, lucrative contracts, and virtual likes. For me, it was the first day of a silent war, a war for memory, for legacy, and for honor. The call came the next day at noon, just as I had anticipated. I was in the study, a small room behind the main hall where I kept my collection of old books and calligraphy tools. I was carefully polishing an old Xisha teapot, an heirloom from my grandfather. I had deliberately avoided Li Chang and Anna all morning. I needed the silence to think, and more importantly, I needed them to believe I was broken, helpless, trapped in the sorrowful nostalgia of a bygone era. Their underestimation of me was a crucial element of my plan. "Father," Li Chang's voice came through the phone, tinged with impatience, as if it had taken all his courage to make the call. "I know you're upset, but you need to understand. This is for the best, for all of us." I gently placed the teapot on a silk cloth, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "The best? How do you define the best, Chang?" "Be realistic, father." He sighed, a dramatic sigh, the kind a wise adult uses when explaining things to a stubborn child. "How much does this tea house make a month?" "A few regular customers, some of your old friends coming for tea and poetry. It's not even enough to cover the maintenance for such an old building. Meanwhile, I can turn this place into a money-making machine. Just from yesterday's live stream, the first advertising contract with a wine brand brought in this much." He paused, perhaps to let the number sink in. 10 times your annual income from selling tea. "I never saw Jingyue Tang as a place to make money," I replied, my tone flat. "That's precisely the problem." His voice rose, his impatience showing. "You and Mother lived in a different world, an idealistic world that no longer exists. Now, value is measured by fame, by social media followers, by money. Do you know how many followers Anna has? Millions. A single post from her here, and the value of this place skyrockets. Do you understand? That's the power of a personal brand. We are sitting on a gold mine that you've been using as a flower garden." I remained silent, letting the shallowness of his words expose itself. He saw the legacy of his ancestors, his mother's love, and my life's work as nothing more than a backdrop for his girlfriend's personal brand. He was comparing Jingyue Tang to a gold mine, something to be dug up, exploited until it was exhausted, and then discarded. "Anna said," he continued when I didn't respond, "we can keep a small corner, a section in the main hall, call it the Old Artisan's Heritage Corner. You can sit there, brew tea, tell old stories to the VIP guests. It will add depth to our brand, a unique fusion. A small corner. In my own home, I was to become an actor, a living decoration for their garish play. The coldness in my chest intensified, hardening like stone. "So, what do you need from me?" I asked, changing the subject, getting straight to the purpose of his call. He seemed surprised by my lack of argument, my easy acquiescence apparently outside his calculations. "Ah, it's good that you're being understanding. I need the property deeds, the ownership certificate, and all related documents. I need full legal authority to sign contracts with major partners. It's just a formality, father. After all, I'm your only son. It will all be mine sooner or later. We're just speeding up the process." Sooner or later, he couldn't even wait. He couldn't even wait for me to close my eyes for the last time. "I need time to think," I said, my voice intentionally laced with weariness and hesitation. Don't think for too long, father. Time is money. The market waits for no one. He paused for a moment before delivering the final, cutting blow. Opportunity waits for no one, especially not the old. He hung up. The last sentence lingered in the quiet air of the study. Especially not the old. To him, I was obsolete. A relic of the past. An obstacle on his path to success. He didn't understand that sometimes, the greatest strength, the most profound wisdom, comes from the very things he considered old and outdated. I rose and walked to the mahogany bookshelf. I wasn't looking for the property deeds. They were stored in a safe place. Instead, I took out an old, dusty address book. The names in it didn't have millions of social media followers. They didn't have personal brands. But a single word from them, a single chop of their seal, could shake the entire cultural world of Beijing. My finger traced down the yellowed pages, stopping at one name. Chen Lin. Old Master Chen. Phase 1 was nearly complete. I understood my opponent perfectly. Phase 2 was about to begin. It was time to sow the first seeds of truth. Old Master Chen lived in another Siheiwan, a courtyard house nestled deeper in an even narrower alley. It was smaller and more modest than Jingyue Tang, but the air within its walls was thicker with history. Everything in his home, from the low tea table to the towering bookshelves filled with cloth-bound classics, exuded a quiet dignity of time. He was a leading expert on carved seals and the appraisal of antiques, one of the few remaining old masters of our generation. We had been friends since we were children with pigtails, growing up together in these alleys, witnessing the city's tumultuous changes from the leanest years to the current economic boom. Our friendship needed few words. It was built on a foundation of mutual understanding and absolute trust. I arrived unannounced, carrying only a box of aged pu'er tea that I had stored for over 20 years, the very gift he had given me when Ming Yue passed away. Old Master Chen, with his stark white hair and thick presbyopic glasses perched on his nose, was hunched over, meticulously carving a seal from a piece of honey-colored Shaoshen stone. The scraping of the carving knife on the stone was a steady, rhythmic sound. He looked up, squinting at my shadow falling across his floor, and then a kind smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Old Li, what wind brings you here at this hour? You don't look well. A contrary wind, old Chen, I said, placing the tea box on the table. I've come to repay a debt of kindness. We sat at the tea table, and he began the ritual of preparing tea with a familiar, silent grace. Heating the water, rinsing the pot, awakening the tea leaves. His every movement was slow, precise, and held a meditative quality. I didn't need to say much. After the third infusion, when the rich, earthy aroma of the aged pu'er had filled the room, carrying with it the scent of years gone by, I began my story. I told him everything, from the moment I returned, the scene at Jingyue Tang, to the phone call with Li Chang. I recounted it objectively, without emotion, as if narrating an event that had happened to someone else. Old Master Chen listened in silence, his thumb tapping a gentle, steady rhythm on the side of his celadon teacup. When I had finished, he offered no empty words of comfort. He just looked at me for a long moment and asked the one question I knew he would. What do you need me to do? That was our friendship. No useless platitudes, only action. I need your help with something, I said, my voice low. I need you to create a story. His eyes glinted behind his thick lenses. He set down his teacup. A story? Yes. A true story about Jingyue Tang that has been forgotten. A story that even I never knew. I took out the old notebook from my inner pocket, the renovation journal I had reviewed the other night. I turned to a page with notes on reinforcing the tea house's foundation 30 years ago. I pointed to a brief entry. Dug down to the foundation, found a few old bricks with strange patterns, kept one as a souvenir. Then, I carefully took out a small brocade box. Inside, resting on a bed of red velvet, was a grayish brick, about the size of my palm. On its surface was an ancient, square-shaped character, with complex strokes I could not recognize. This was the truth. This brick had sat in this brocade box for 30 years. But from this small truth a legend would be built. Old Chen, I said, my voice low and clear. You are the expert. Examine this brick. Research it. Give it a great past, a past with enough weight to protect itself. Old Master Chen said nothing. He carefully put on a pair of white cotton gloves and picked up the brick with reverence. He turned it over and over, examining every detail, every crack, every mark of time with a magnifying glass. The silence in the room grew thick, broken only by the soft breathing of two old men. Finally, after nearly 10 minutes, he placed the brick down, removed his gloves, and looked at me with a strange expression, a mixture of astonishment and excitement. Li Wei, he said slowly, his voice trembling slightly, This story doesn't need to be created. It's already here. We just need to uncover it. He pointed to the character on the brick. This is no ordinary character. This is a type of proprietary seal, an identification mark of the Imperial Jili archives from the reign of the Yongle Emperor of the Ming Dynasty. It was the place where the most important documents, imperial edicts, and secret maps of the court were stored. My heart pounded once, hard. My plan had just taken a turn that I myself had not foreseen. It was no longer a play, it was becoming a historical excavation. I mean, Old Master Chen said, a mysterious smile I rarely saw playing on his lips. Your son wants to turn a national treasure into a circus. He doesn't know that he is sitting on a historical site far more significant than he could ever imagine. Jingyu Tang might not just be a tea house. It could be the last remaining part of the Jili archives, long thought to have been completely destroyed in a great fire. He stood up and went to his bookshelves, pulling out several thick, ancient-looking thread-bound books. Give me a week. I will not create a story. I will find the truth, and I will give you a narrative authenticated by history. A narrative with enough weight to crush any club, any multi-million yuan contract. I left Old Master Chen's house as dusk began to settle over the ancient alleys. Phase 2 was completed more brilliantly than I could have hoped. The seed had been sown, and it was not just a seed of doubt. It was the seed of a forgotten truth, a magnificent truth that would soon rise and reclaim its rightful place. For the next week, I transformed myself into a ghost in my own home, a performance that demanded absolute patience and self-control. I donned the guise of a senile old man, broken and helpless. I spent my days in the study, pretending to read but actually organizing old materials, searching for any further clues that might bolster Old Master Chen's story. Occasionally, I would step out into the courtyard, stand silently for a long time, and watch the transformation of Jingyu Tang with a look of sad resignation. I watched the workmen dismantle the green flagstones that Mingyu and I had laid together, watch them take measurements to build a bar, and I would only sigh and turn away. Li Chang and Anna, after a few initial days of caution, were now completely convinced that I had accepted my fate. My surrender was too perfect, too convincing. They even began to show me pity. Anna would sometimes bring me a plate of cut fruit, her voice syrupy, sweet, and fake. Uncle, just rest, don't think too much. We'll take care of everything. The future of Jingyu Tang will be very bright. Li Chang would occasionally pat me on the shoulder, saying things like, "Don't worry, father. I won't let mother's legacy be forgotten. I'll make it more famous than ever. The whole world will know its name." They didn't understand that they were personally destroying the very legacy they boasted of developing. Their arrogance and ignorance were my greatest allies. While I played my part, their commercial machine operated at full throttle. A team of famous interior designers was hired. They walked through the tea house, pointing, commenting. My precious antique rosewood furniture was tagged with "for sale" stickers. They even planned to completely demolish the mossy rockery to build an outdoor bar with LED lights. Every one of their actions I documented carefully with a small digital camera hidden in my room. I took pictures from hidden angles, recording the rough treatment of the antiques. These photos would later serve as irrefutable evidence of their ignorance and destructive behavior. Meanwhile, in the outside world, the world of true value, my undercurrent had begun to spread. Old Master Chen, true to his word, had been working tirelessly. He organized a small, private meeting, attended only by 2 venerable history professors from Peking University and a leading researcher from the Institute of Archaeology. He did not speak of my plan, nor did he mention Li Qiang or Anna. He presented the brick and his hypotheses as a serious academic discovery. He showed them ancient texts that mentioned the approximate location of the Jili archives, old maps of Beijing, all of which pointed to this Hutong area. Their reaction, as Old Master Chen later told me over the phone, was one of utter astonishment and excitement. The possibility of rediscovering such a significant lost relic was a momentous event. Rumors began to circulate within the small but highly influential circles of antique collectors and historians. A shocking discovery was about to be announced. A major Ming Dynasty site might have been found right in the heart of modern Beijing. Small discussions began to take place at scholars' tea parties and on specialized academic forums. The name Jingyu Tang began to be mentioned, not as a tea house about to be reborn by an internet celebrity, but as a historical mystery waiting to be solved. On the 6th day, I happened to walk past the living room and overheard Li Qiang's phone call. He was speaking to a major investor, his voice filled with excitement. "Yes, you can rest assured. Everything is settled. My father. He has completely agreed. No more problems. Next week, on Saturday evening, we will hold a contract signing ceremony and a grand launch party. It will be live-streamed on all platforms. It will be the biggest high society event of the year." The time had come. The prey was in the trap. The stage had been set, not by me, but by their own arrogance. That evening, I knocked on Li Chang's door. I handed him an old wooden box. "Chang," I said, my voice weak and tired. "I've thought it through. You are grown, you have your own ideas. I can't stand in your way forever. In here are the title deed and all the property documents. Do what you think is right." He opened the box, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the stack of documents inside. He looked at me, a mixture of triumph and a sliver of pity in his eyes. "I knew you would understand, Father. You're the best father ever. You won't regret this." "I hope not," I said, and turned away. I had given him the bait. The fish had taken it, swallowing the hook, line, and sinker. I looked out the window, where the neon lights from the Anna's Tea Club sign cast grotesque, sickly colors on Mingyua's camellia tree. The tree stood there, silent, resilient, as if waiting for a coming storm to wash away all this filth. "Enjoy it while you can, my son. Savor your victory, because it will be your last one in this place." The grand opening of the club was set for Saturday evening, a date carefully chosen to attract maximum media attention. Jingyue Tang had never been so noisy and garish. The tranquility and elegance that Mingyu and I had spent a lifetime preserving had been crushed under the heel of ostentation. A red carpet was rolled out from the main gate to the inner courtyard. Tacky clusters of gold and silver balloons were hung everywhere, even snagging on the branches of the ancient trees. A small stage with a professional DJ setup was erected right where the rockery had been unceremoniously demolished. The smell of strong liquor, expensive perfume, and cigarette smoke mixed into a suffocating, dense atmosphere that made it hard for me to breathe. Li Chang and Anna were the center of attention, the king and queen of this ridiculous feast. He wore a white designer suit, looking like a groom on his wedding day, walking around shaking hands and laughing with the guests. Anna was like a chameleon, changing into 3 different evening gowns throughout the night for her live stream. She chattered endlessly, introducing every corner of the new check-in spot to her millions of followers. "See, everyone? This is the perfect fusion of classic and modern. We've breathed new life into a dying place. Look, even these old bricks look so vintage under our lights." As she spoke, she ground the heel of her stiletto into the very flagstones I had so painstakingly sourced. As per their arrangement, I was required to sit in the heritage corner, a small, dimly lit area near the kitchen, separated from the main space by a cheap folding screen. They placed a tea set in front of me, and Anna did not forget to point her camera at me for a few seconds, her tone like she was introducing a unique decorative item. "And this is Master Li Wei, my boyfriend's father, the soul of this place. Later, he will perform the ancient art of tea-making for us." I sat there, silent, in my plain, worn, dark-colored traditional robe. I did not brew tea. I just sat, back straight, my calm eyes observing everything like a spectator at a poorly written play. I watched the slick investors talk about money and profits. I watched the other internet celebrities, carbon copies of Anna, who only knew how to take selfies and comment on each other's outfits. I watched the journalists from entertainment news sites, who were only interested in sensational stories. They were all moths, drawn to the flame of this false glamour, unaware that they were dancing on the edge of a volcano about to erupt. At exactly 8 o'clock, the most important part of the party began. The DJ music faded out, replaced by a grand, dramatic overture. Li Chang stepped onto the makeshift stage, microphone in hand. The spotlight made his white suit even more dazzling. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and to all our friends watching the live stream. Welcome to the grand launch of Anna's Tea Club," he announced, his voice filled with confidence and pride. "Tonight, we are not just opening a new business venue. We are witnessing the rebirth of a heritage. We are writing a new chapter for Beijing's culture." Thunderous applause erupted. Anna stood beside him, her eyes glistening with pride, holding her phone up high to capture her moment of glory. "Many say that tradition is fading, that the youth are turning their backs on our national culture," Li Chang continued his prepared speech. "But I believe they are not turning their backs. They just need a new approach. Tradition just needs a new coat, a more fashionable and exclusive one. And tonight, we, along with our esteemed investment partners from the Yongsheng Group, will sign a 50 million yuan contract to turn this place into the premier cultural and entertainment destination in Asia." A long table draped in velvet was brought out by 2 staff members. The chairman of the Yongsheng Group, a portly middle-aged man, stepped onto the stage, beaming. The cameras flashed incessantly. Millions were watching online. This was the pinnacle for Li Chang and Anna. Li Chang picked up a gold-plated fountain pen, uncapped it, and prepared to sign the contract laid out on the table. It was as if he were about to sign the death warrant for the very soul of Jingyue Tang. And it was at that exact moment, amidst the expectant silence, that the crimson-lacquered gates of Jingyu Tang were once again pushed open. A small creak, but it was loud enough to cut through the tension of the entire space. But this time, it was not a lonely and helpless old man. This time, it was the arrival of history itself. Every head in the courtyard, including the lenses of the live streaming cameras, turned in unison towards the gate. The grand overture music faded, and then died completely. An abrupt silence fell over the space, a silence heavy with foreboding. The glamorous party was suddenly frozen in time. Old Master Chen entered first. He was not in his usual home attire, but was dressed in a formal, dark blue changshan, a traditional long gown meticulously tailored. In his hand, he held a walking stick made of sandalwood, its handle carved in the shape of a qilin. His presence radiated a scholarly and commanding aura that demanded respect. Following him were two white-haired professors whom I recognized as giants in the field of history from Peking University, scholars whose publications could shake the academic world. And walking last was a middle-aged man in a black Western suit, his face stern, carrying a leather briefcase. I knew him. He was Director Wang from the Municipal Cultural Heritage Bureau, a man famous for his integrity and uncompromising nature. Their arrival was like a boulder dropped into a placid pond, sending ripples of confusion throughout the venue. Li Chang stood frozen on the stage, the pen trembling in his hand, a drop of ink falling onto the expensive contract. Anna stopped her live stream, her smile frozen on her face as she stared in bewilderment. Old Master Chen walked directly to the foot of the stage, his sharp eyes sweeping over Li Chang, past the neon backdrop, and then settling on the crowd. His voice was not loud, but it was resonant and authoritative, cutting through the rising murmurs. Quite a lively event, but I'm afraid you have chosen the wrong place for your celebration. The chairman of the Yongsheng group frowned, annoyed by the unexpected interruption. Who are you? Who let you in here? Director Wang stepped forward, standing beside Old Master Chen. He looked at the chairman, his voice cold and official. This is Professor Chen Lin, a senior consultant to the Cultural Heritage Bureau, and we are here today on urgent official business, authorized by higher authorities. The words official business made the atmosphere even more tense. Director Wang opened his briefcase and took out a folder with a bright red official seal. We have received authenticated evidence from independent researchers and have conducted a preliminary assessment. This place, known as Jingyue Tang, is in fact built on the foundation and remaining structure of the Imperial Jili Archives from the reign of the Yongle Emperor of the Ming Dynasty, a key national historical site long thought to have been completely lost in a great fire, nearly 400 years ago. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The journalists, with their professional instincts, immediately turned their cameras and microphones towards the delegation. This was a much bigger story than a 50 million yuan contract. Old Master Chen continued, his voice now filled with emotion, like a guardian of history. The flagstones you are treading on, the Nanmu wood pillars supporting these eaves, even the old inkstone on the study desk, are all relics from a past dynasty. This is not an ordinary tea house. This is a living historical monument, a witness to the passage of time. He pointed his sandalwood cane at the pink neon backdrop. And you people, out of ignorance and greed, are holding a party on a national heritage site. You are destroying history in front of millions of viewers. Anna stammered, her face turning pale beneath her heavy makeup. No, that's impossible. It's just an old house. How could it be? An old house? The other history professor spoke up, his voice filled with contempt and indignation. Young lady, the cultural and historical value contained within this old house is something that your entire frivolous career could never equal. Ignorance is no excuse for acts of destruction. Li Chang's face was as white as a sheet. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with panic, pleading, and disbelief. He finally understood. He understood my smile that day. He understood my silence over the past week. I remained seated in my dark corner, silently raising the empty teacup to my lips, a gesture that only Mingyu and I would have understood. My play had ended. Now, it was time for the truth, with the weight of centuries of history, to speak, and its voice was deafening. Director Wang held up the official document, his voice loud and unequivocal, leaving no room for argument. By urgent order of the National Cultural Heritage Administration, effective immediately, Jingyue Tang will be completely sealed off to facilitate comprehensive archaeological investigation and appraisal. All commercial, construction, and renovation activities here are strictly prohibited until further notice. Any action that damages the current state of the monument, no matter how minor, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law on the protection of cultural heritage. Sealed off? The Yongsheng chairman shouted, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. What about our 50 million yuan contract? We've already invested in this. Director Wang looked at him coldly, as if looking at a fool. Your contract was signed based on an asset of special historical value, which now has a high probability of being state property, sir. Legally, it is void. You should consider yourself fortunate that we are not pursuing criminal charges against your corporation for abetting the destruction of heritage. That statement was like a bucket of ice water dousing the chairman's fire. He stood speechless, realizing he had bet on a losing hand in the most humiliating way possible. The party devolved into a chaotic retreat. The investors argued, blaming Li Chang. The guests hurriedly left, as if afraid of being implicated in a national scandal. The journalists were like a swarm of bees. Half of them surrounded Director Wang and Old Master Chen for information, while the other half aimed their cameras and microphones at Li Chang and Anna, the protagonists of the tragedy. And that was when true hell began for Anna, in a way she could never have imagined. In her panic, her phone was still live streaming. Millions of followers had witnessed the entire event, from the delegation's arrival to the director's proclamation. The comment section on her screen, which minutes ago was filled with praise and heart emojis, now exploded with outrage. Oh my God, she was going to destroy a national monument to make a check-in club? This is unforgivable ignorance, blinded by greed. Boycott Anna. Demand that brands drop her. Destroying culture is a crime. The authorities need to investigate her. The hashtag number Anna Destroys Heritage became the #1 trending topic on the social media platform Weibo within minutes. Anna stared at her phone screen, her beautiful face now contorted with horror. Her follower count began to plummet at a dizzying rate, tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands unfollowing. The cosmetic and fashion brands she represented began receiving a flood of negative comments. Minutes later, their social media teams were scrambling to delete posts featuring her. The career she had spent years building with fake images and industrial smiles was dissolving into thin air right before her eyes. She let out a piercing shriek, a scream of despair, and collapsed to the ground, her expensive designer dress now looking utterly pathetic. Li Chang stood alone in the center of the courtyard, amidst the wreckage of his grandiose dream and the relentless flashing of cameras. He didn't look at Anna, nor at the angry investors. He looked at me. His eyes no longer held arrogance or calculation, only utter bewilderment, complete collapse, and a silent, agonizing question. Why? I slowly stood up and stepped out of my heritage corner. The party lights now illuminated me, but I was no longer a dim, decorative object. I walked past Li Chang without a word, without a single glance. I went to Mingyue's camellia tree, where some balloons were still entangled. I gently untangled a golden balloon and brushed away a few glittering specks of confetti that had landed on a green leaf. Sometimes, justice does not require a sword or sharp words. Sometimes, it only requires the truth and a well-timed silence. 2 days later, Jingyue Tang had returned to its inherent tranquility, but it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer the serene, inviting quietness of a tea house, but the solemn stillness of a protected site. Yellow ceiling tape from the authorities was strung across every entrance, from the main gate to each individual room. Archaeologists in white protective gear moved about gently, using small brushes and specialized tools to work with absolute reverence. The air was filled with a sense of gravity and respect for history. At the request of Old Master Chen, and with the approval of Director Wang, I was allowed to stay on as a temporary caretaker and on-site consultant, given my intimate knowledge of the building's structure. Li Chang came to see me on a rainy afternoon. The drizzle of Beijing made the dark yin-yang roof tiles glisten and the air feel damp and cold. He was no longer in a suit, just a simple gray t-shirt and faded blue jeans. He looked much thinner and paler, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. The confident, arrogant demeanor of a few days ago had completely vanished, replaced by an aura of exhaustion and defeat. He stood before me in the now empty main hall, most of the furniture having been moved to facilitate the archaeological work. He stood with his head bowed, not daring to look me in the eye. Rain pattered softly on the eaves outside. It was all arranged by you, wasn't it? He finally spoke, his voice hoarse and weak. I was sitting at the only remaining small table, on which sat a simple tea set. I poured a cup of hot tea, the steam rising in a thin wisp, and pushed it towards him. Sit. Drink this to warm yourself. He hesitated, then sat down, but did not touch the teacup. I looked at him, my gaze not angry, nor triumphant. There was only a deep, profound sadness. I did not arrange everything, Chang. I only helped people see the truth. The truth was already there, right under your feet, in every brick, in every beam of wood. You just didn't want to see it, or you believed it was worth less than other things. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning? If you had told me this was a historical site, I wouldn't have done it. Why did you have to go this far? Why did you have to destroy me like this? Because if I had told you, you would not have believed me, I replied, my voice calm but firm. You would have dismissed it as the words of a senile old man, clinging stubbornly to the past to stop his son from progressing. You would have hired other experts to prove me wrong. You only believe in what you can see, in glamour, in things that bring immediate profit. I had to show you, and show the world, the price of ignorance and greed. Sometimes a lesson can only be learned when one has paid too high a price. He fell silent, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Anna has left. She's blaming everything on me. The investors are suing me, demanding compensation. I've lost everything. My reputation, my money, my friends, everything. You lost everything the day you decided to turn your mother's memory into a commodity for sale, I said, my tone a little sterner. Son, you always talk about value, but you don't understand what true value is. You think it lies in the numbers in a bank account, in the number of followers on social media, but true value, it lies here. I pointed to my heart. It is heritage, memory, respect, self-respect. These are things that cannot be bought with money, and once lost are very hard to find again. He buried his head in his hands and began to cry, not loudly, but with the quiet, choked sobs of a defeated man, of a lost child who realizes he has strayed too far. What do I do now, Father? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the white curtain of rain washing over the courtyard. That is no longer a question I can answer for you. You are 28 years old. You chose your own path. You made your own decisions. Now, you must find your own way out. You must redefine for yourself what value truly means. I left him alone in the cold main hall with the cup of tea that had long gone cold. I had saved Jingyue Tang, saved its soul. But I knew. I had lost the son I once knew. Perhaps forever. And this victory, why did it taste so bitter? 1 year later, Beijing had cycled through its 4 seasons, and Jingyue Tang had undergone a profound transformation. After months of excavation and research, historians confirmed its identity as a significant part of the Imperial Jili archives. The discovery was hailed as a major event in modern Chinese archaeology. Jingyue Tang was no longer my family's private tea house. In accordance with my wishes and the state's decision, it was carefully restored and became a small museum, a branch of the National Museum of History, open to the public. The government preserved almost everything intact, from the name Jingyue Tang to Mingyue's camellia tree. They only reinforced the structure, installed preservation systems, and placed glass-encased plaques that told the story of this place through the centuries. I was no longer the owner but was appointed the honorary consultant and head of expertise for the museum. It was an unpaid but deeply honorable title. Every day I came here, not to do business but to share. I told tour groups and young students about the history of the site, the art of tea, the meaning behind each calligraphy scroll on the walls. I saw the image of Ming Yue in their admiring and curious eyes. Her spirit, the spirit of Jingyue Tang, was no longer confined within these 4 walls. It was being disseminated, destined to live forever in the hearts of those who appreciate it. One late autumn afternoon, as the ginkgo leaves in the alley turned a brilliant gold, I was explaining to a group of architecture students the difference between the dugong brackets on the eaves. As I was engrossed in my explanation, I saw a familiar figure standing at a distance, mingled with the crowd of tourists. He was dressed simply, carrying an old backpack, listening quietly. It was Li Chang. He looked completely different. His skin was tanned by the sun and wind, his build more solid. He had shaved off his stylish hair, replaced by a simple buzz cut. He made no attempt to approach me or draw attention, just stood and listened like an ordinary visitor. The arrogance and ambition in his eyes were gone. In their place was a quiet gravity, a deep sadness, but not a self-pitying one, and perhaps a sliver of understanding that he never had before. When the tour ended and people began to disperse, he remained. He waited until only the 2 of us were left in the quiet courtyard. He slowly walked over and placed a small, simple wooden box on the stone table. "I'm leaving soon," he said, his voice low and a little hesitant. "I've sold my remaining shares in my old company, paid off all the debts to the investors. I'm going to the mountains in Yunnan to learn how to grow and process tea from the ethnic minority people there. To start over, from the roots." I remained silent, just looking at him. He opened the box. Inside there was nothing of value. Just a small seal, clumsily carved from a piece of ordinary wood, not precious stone. On its face were 2 Chinese characters, Hui Gai, repentance and reform. "This, I carved it myself for you," he said, his voice faltering. "It's worthless. It's just that, maybe one day, when I truly understand the value of a cup of tea, I will be worthy to come back and drink a cup brewed by you." He bowed to me, a deep, formal bow, one he hadn't performed since he was a child. Then he turned and walked away, without another word of farewell. I watched his retreating back until it disappeared beyond the crimson-lacquered gate. I didn't call him back. I didn't make any promises. Some paths must be walked alone. Some lessons must be learned in solitude. Forgiveness is not a gift that can be easily given. It is something that must be earned through genuine change. I picked up the seal. The carving was naive, rough, but I could feel the effort and sincerity within it. I looked around the museum that was once my home. I had given away a house to preserve a heritage. I had temporarily lost a son to give him a chance to find himself. I did not know what the future held. But that evening, as the last rays of the autumn sun filtered through the window lattice, bathing the space in a golden light, I sat down, alone, and brewed myself a pot of tea. The fragrance was rich, the taste pure. For the first time in a very long time, I felt a complete sense of peace, untinged by any bitterness. Jingyue Tang had found its eternity, and I too had found my own serenity. Winter descended upon Beijing, bringing with it biting northern winds that whistled through the Hutong alleys. Jingyue Tang, now in its role as a museum, exuded a different kind of beauty. A thin layer of snow blanketed the yin-yang tiled roofs and the bare branches of the camellia tree, creating a serene and solemn inkwash painting. The clamor of the tourist season had passed, returning the place to its inherent quietude. On these days, visitors were few, mostly those who truly loved history and art. They walked softly, spoke in whispers, as if afraid to disturb the sleeping soul of the past. My work had also become more tranquil. I spent most of my time in the old study, now reorganized into a research room, helping the young experts from the museum classify and decipher ancient texts found during the restoration. I found joy in passing on my meager knowledge, in seeing the flame of passion for traditional culture kindled in the eyes of the younger generation. The pain regarding Li Chang was still there, an old wound that ached when the weather turned, but it no longer throbbed with the same intensity. I was learning to live with it, just as one learns to live with a missing part of oneself. One afternoon, as heavy snow was falling, I was showing a young intern how to recognize the brushwork of famous Ming Dynasty calligraphers when she hesitantly showed me her phone. "Master Li," she said with some trepidation. "Look, isn't this the girl who caused the trouble here last year?" On the screen was a live stream video of someone selling goods. In a cramped room with harsh white lighting, Anna was hawking cheap ceramic tea sets, advertised as imperial court tea ceremony style. Her face was still heavily made up, but it couldn't hide her exhaustion and haggardness. The radiant smile of yesteryear now looked forced and somewhat desperate. She chattered away, using the same empty platitudes about lifestyle and exclusivity, but no one was buying it. The comment section was sparse, mostly filled with mockery and reminders of the old scandal. "The person who destroyed a heritage site is now talking about culture?" One comment scrolled by. I looked at Anna in the video, feeling not a shred of satisfaction. Instead, a sense of emptiness and a tinge of pity washed over me. She had once stood at the pinnacle of a virtual world, hailed by millions. Now she was still trying to cling to that world, but it had turned its back on her. She was like a moth whose wings had been scorched by the flame, yet it still tried to crawl towards the light, not realizing that the light itself was what had destroyed it. She had chosen the easiest path, blaming others, playing the victim, and trying to rebuild a sandcastle on collapsed ground. But the public did not forget, and the virtual world that had elevated her was the same one that had buried her without mercy. I handed the phone back to the intern, saying gently, "The past is past. There's no need to bring it up again." But her image haunted me for the rest of the afternoon. It made me think of Li Chang. Anna had chosen the path of ephemera, of denial and superficial reinvention. So what path had my son chosen? His journey to faraway Yunnan, was it an escape, or was it truly a quest for redemption? Nearly a year had passed since he left. Not a single letter, not a single phone call. That silence was sometimes heavier than any words of reproach. That evening, after the museum had closed, I stayed behind alone. I went to the study and took out the wooden seal Li Chang had left. Under the lamplight, the two characters Hui Gai, repentance and reform, appeared simple and stark. I placed the seal next to the ancient Duangxi inkstone. On one side was a symbol of youthful folly, of a clumsy attempt to make amends. On the other, a symbol of profound stillness, of enduring value through hundreds of years. They sat side by side, a heart-wrenching contrast. Anna had shown me the end of one road, and I could only hope in silence that my son had chosen a different one, a rockier and more painful road, but the only one that could lead to true salvation. Spring arrived later than usual, but the warm sunbeams finally managed to pierce through the lingering cold of the long winter. The camellia tree in the courtyard of Jingyue Tang began to sprout its first buds, shy and full of life. The revival of the earth sometimes makes the human heart feel lonelier, for it exposes the corners of the soul that are still frozen. Every morning, as I strolled in the courtyard, I would unconsciously glance towards the gate, an involuntary habit born of waiting. One afternoon in March, as I was sitting with Old Master Chen drinking tea in the main hall, a security guard brought in a parcel. It was not a regular letter. It was an envelope made of coarse, handmade paper, yellowish-brown in color. There was no clear sender's address, only a faint postmark from a remote county in Yunnan province. My heart skipped a beat. Old Master Chen looked at me with understanding in his eyes. "Open it, Old Li. Whatever news it brings, it must be faced." I carefully used a small paper knife to slit the edge of the envelope. Inside was not a single letter. There was a thin sheet of Schwan paper folded into quarters, and a small paper packet tied with a dry straw string. I unfolded the Schwan paper first. The handwriting on it was not Li Chang's. It was the strong, mature brushstrokes of an older person. The letter read, "To Mr. Li in Beijing, I am Jia Ming, an old tea farmer in these Wuliang mountains. I take the liberty of writing this letter to you, at the request of a young man named Li Chang. He said he did not dare to write to his father himself, for he felt he was not yet worthy. The boy arrived here last autumn. At first, he seemed no different from the other city youths who come here seeking temporary inspiration. He was arrogant, impatient, and looked down on manual labor. He thought making tea was simply about picking leaves and drying them. I was ready to send him away after 3 days. But something kept him here, and it kept me from sending him away. Perhaps it was his silence. He did not argue, did not complain. He just quietly did as he was told, failing time and again. Winter in these mountains is harsh, Mr. Li. His hands, accustomed to holding pens and phones, became blistered and cracked from picking tea leaves in the frost. His back ached from carrying heavy baskets of tea down the steep slopes. Many nights, I saw him sitting alone on the porch, gazing northwards, without saying a word. I knew he was homesick and at war with himself, but he did not give up. Gradually, his arrogance disappeared, replaced by humility. He began to learn to listen not just to my words, but to the voice of the earth, the tea trees, the young leaves. He learned that to make a good pot of tea requires not just technique, but patience, respect, and a pure heart. He is no longer the city boy who arrived here. He has become a true tea maker, one who understands the value of every drop of sweat. The small packet of tea enclosed is a spring sheng, raw, pur, that he personally participated in making, from picking the leaves to firing, rolling, and pressing it into a cake. It is not the finest tea. His technique is still raw, but he told me that in every leaf there is his repentance and his hope. He asked me to send it to you, as a first apology. He said, only when the tea in his hands no longer has the bitter taste of shame, but only the sweet aftertaste of sincerity, will he dare to return. Please forgive this old man's impertinence. Respectfully, Jia Ming. I read the letter over and over, each word sinking into my heart. It was a simple letter, but it told a grand story. A story of a belated coming of age, of a cleansing. I carefully opened the small paper packet. Inside was a tightly compressed cake of pu'er tea, dark green in color, exuding a wild fragrance of the mountains, of the sun, and of the earth. Old Master Chen looked at me, said nothing, but quietly refilled our teapots with hot water. I placed the letter and the tea packet next to the Hui Gai seal. Now, they were no longer inanimate objects. They were in dialogue with one another. The seal was the beginning of a promise. And this packet of tea was the first fruit of that promise. I couldn't sleep that night. I just sat in the study, looking at the small tea cake under the lamplight. I was not yet ready to brew it. I was afraid that the taste would be too bitter, or afraid that, if it was indeed sweet, I would not know what to do next with the forgiveness that was beginning to sprout in my heart. Another month passed. The camellia blossoms in the courtyard of Jingyue Tang finally burst forth, showcasing their pure white petals and releasing a delicate fragrance in the morning sun. The packet of tea from Yunnan still sat untouched on my writing desk, next to the farmer Jia Ming's letter and the Hui Gai seal. Every day I looked at them, as if gazing at a difficult Go problem for which I had yet to find a solution. The game I had orchestrated a year ago, I had won absolutely. But the game of father and son, it seemed, had only just begun. Life at the museum continued its steady rhythm. The fame of Jingyue Tang spread far and wide. International delegations came to visit, and many researchers applied for internships. I had become a living symbol of heritage preservation, respected by all. But deep within me, there was an empty space. The respect of strangers could not fill the void left by a son. Then one day, while explaining the concept of huigan, the returning sweetness, of tea to a group of visitors, I had an epiphany. I spoke of the sweet aftertaste that lingers in the throat after the initial bitterness and astringency have passed. That, I explained, is the essence of a fine tea. Is not life the same? Does not repentance also need a huigan? That day, after the museum closed, I decided I would brew the tea. This was no ordinary tea session. I prepared everything with the solemnity of an important ceremony. I did not use my most precious Xisha teapot. Instead, I chose a simple, rustic earthenware pot that Mingyue had been fond of. She used to say it preserved the truest flavor of the tea. I used pure spring water that was delivered to me weekly from the mountains. For the fire, I didn't use an electric stove but a small charcoal brazier, letting the flames burn low and steady. I carefully used a small bamboo pick to break off a piece of tea from the poor cake. The dry leaves looked coarse, not as glossy as premium teas, but they held a fierce vitality. I placed the tea in the pot and rinsed it once with hot water to awaken the sleeping leaves. Immediately, a powerful aroma filled the room. It was not the delicate fragrance of elaborately processed teas. It was the scent of the wilderness, of damp earth, of sunshine and wind, and faintly, somewhere within it, the smell of sweat. I poured the first infusion into the fairness pitcher, and from there, divided it evenly into 2 small cups, one for me, and one I placed on the opposite side of the table, where Mingyue used to sit. I lifted my cup, brought it close to my nose to inhale the full aroma, and then took a small sip. The first taste to hit my tongue was a distinct bitterness and astringency, the raw taste of young tea leaves not yet perfectly processed, the bitterness of a clumsy beginning. I closed my eyes, letting that bitterness spread. But then, as I swallowed, something miraculous happened. The bitterness and astringency did not linger. Instead, a clean, gentle sweetness began to emerge from the sides of my tongue, slowly spreading down my throat. It was a deep, enduring sweetness. Huigan, the returning sweetness. That was it. In that moment, it was as if I had tasted my son's entire story over the past year. The bitterness was the months of hard labor, the self-torment, the shame, and this sweetness was the fruit of his perseverance, the change from deep within. I finally understood the meaning of the 2 characters on the seal. Hui, repentance, was the initial bitterness, and Gai, reform, was the sweetness that followed. Without the bitterness, the sweetness would be meaningless. I drank the tea and poured another infusion. This time, the bitterness was much milder, and the sweetness came faster, more pronounced. I sat there, alone, in the silence of Jingyue Tang, until the sun had completely set. I no longer felt tormented or hesitant. Forgiveness is not a decision, it's a process. And this cup of tea had helped me complete that process. I picked up the smartphone I rarely used. I found the name Li Cheng in my contacts, a name I had never deleted. I did not call. A call right now would perhaps be too much. Instead, I slowly typed a short text message. The tea tastes of sunshine. Come home when the rainy season up there is over. I pressed send and then put the phone down on the table. I did not wait for a reply. I had done my part. The rest was up to him. I walked out into the courtyard and took a deep breath of the cool evening air. In the sky, the first stars were beginning to twinkle. The future was still unknown. The bridge between father and son still needed to be rebuilt. But tonight, I knew that the first stones had been laid, and they were laid on a foundation of understanding, which had begun with a cup of tea that tasted of both bitterness and sweetness.